about the reading comprehension section, let me at least put your mind at ease a little bit on that. You know, for instance, especially if English is not your first language, all is not lost, obviously. I mean, obviously you already know how to read and write English pretty well, or you wouldn't at this point in your academic career. But secondly, the important thing that I want to get across, and this is a skill that you're going to carry over into the math section of the test, is that the reading comprehension sections are much, much more about the questions that you need to answer than they are about the passage that you're supposed to be, answering the questions about. And there are certain little tricks and little tactics that they use over and over and over again. And once you start to become familiar with those, you realize that your task is a lot easier than it appeared at first. Because honestly, for the reading comprehension section, it's not necessary that you comprehend everything that you read. I mean, far from it. First of all, just as we saw in the previous couple of weeks, with sentence completion, sentence equivalence, and the word roots, they'll introduce some strange, odd, new word. You know, right here, just a second. Right here, there's a word that I don't want to learn. And you're never going to need to. Because, well, right there, they tell you what it means. When they give you unusual words, you can expect that they will give you a definition or an example of that thing in context, usually in the half sentence that follows the introduction of the strange word itself. And so don't get fixated at all on the unusual or what we call low frequency words, because you only need to be able to use them in the context of the sentence. I mean, when I read this in my head, I would just call it the T's, or the T people, because I'm not getting paid to sound that word out, and I'm never going to need it again for the rest of my life. So in the process of reading this paper, I'm not going to read that. These guys are the N people, the N's. These guys are the T's, because they're unusual words that I don't need to know. They're not going to come up. Remember, in the reading comprehension sections, none of this is going to require any specialized course knowledge on your part. Even though it may involve biology or astronomy or literature or art history, it's not going to require that you've taken any specific classes in those areas. Just that you have basically the level of skills that any graduate with a general studies degree would have. That you can read an article and within the context of that article understand what they're trying to say. But again, the beauty is you're not being asked to write an essay on this and repeat what they said. You need to read the passage for a basic understanding. But then the task really is answering the questions correctly. And you answer those questions one at a time. And again, since they're going to use several tricks over and over and over, I'm not saying this is like super easy. I'm not saying like you shouldn't take this seriously. But I'm saying it needn't be nearly as intimidating as you might find it right now. And we'll see this. So let's start with this reading passage. Now remember, because you know they're going to try to trick you, that's why you're going to put in the effort to read the instructions very carefully. For instance, right here, select one answer choice unless otherwise instructed. I don't remember if it's this passage or one of the others we might see today. On the very first question, it instructs you to choose all that apply. That is, on the first question, you were otherwise instructed. It's potentially a trick question. So you need to keep them brutally honest. And notice for questions 1 to 4, select one one answer. And notice right here, questions 1 to 3 are based on this passage. What's 4 going to be based on? I don't know yet. But I want to anticipate them trying to throw me a curveball. Just a second. Okay, so this is a short passage. This is, I think, about 150 words. You want to read this. I mean, on the test, you want to read this in actually probably a minute and a half. But, you know, in class, we can take 3 minutes, 4 minutes, whatever, if you want. What you want to do as you read this, you only want to read this one time. That's the key to you being able to do this in the time allotted. Remember, this is not just about getting it right. In practice, if you took all the time you needed, I'm convinced you could get every single question right. But the task in front of you, the game that we're playing, is to get the answers right in a finite amount of time. And that's a, you know, more complicated, more difficult job. And so you want to read this one time. And you want to write down, especially, now, this is something that you're going to work out yourself in practice and in class to find out what works best for you. I recommend you take at least a few notes as you read. And by a few, I mean at least 3 or 4. In a passage this short, you might take 6 notes. And notes definitely don't mean a complete full sentence. A 3 or 4 word little phrase, and you can use symbols, you know, equals, greater than, less than, leads to, you know, whatever works for you. One thing is, if you see an unusual word, you might want to write it down. I mean, in line 2, you have, I don't know, the N people. And especially since they repeat the word. In a passage this short, that's going to be an important concept. Because there are so few words here that if the thing is mentioned at least 3 times out of 100, 150 words, that must be significant. So you want to be aware of that. Now, just to remind everybody, this is a nice word for your sentence equivalency and sentence completion. It's also good to know here. I mean, I could break down the Latin roots for you, but to juxtapose 2 things is to set 2 or more things next to each other. To position something is to place it or set it down. Juxta, in modern Spanish, you have junta, which means together. This means to place 2 things literally next to each other. And very often, juxtaposition, well, here's a word from one of the previous weeks, can lead to anachronisms. That would be 2 things from different time periods that don't naturally go together. You could juxtapose 2 different cultures or religions or languages or, you know, any other kind of tradition with each other, and usually that would lead to a dichotomy, or as an adjective, dichotomous. It may be a perfectly natural pairing, but more often than not, when you see juxtaposition, it means an unusual or an unnatural placing together of 2 different elements. They don't necessarily belong together in the grand scheme of things. And yeah, this is the one. Okay, right here. If we look at the first question, now here are the instructions that apply to this question individually, directly. And notice the instructions right here override the instructions above. They're just being little jerks about this. But as long as you're aware of that, you're probably going to be okay. So please read the passage and then answer the first question. Take about 4 minutes for this. It's not important that we do things as fast today in class as you would on the test, but it is important that you start to adopt a certain amount of discipline when it comes to the time, to realize you don't have all day. You do have to make some compromises. And then if you would, put up the smiley face and let me know your answer in the chat box, and then we'll discuss it. Pretty broad agreement on this one, which is good. Now, there's one statement which one you specifically asked a question about, and yeah, that's true. There's one word that invalidates the answer C. What's the one word that's wrong with C, everybody? Right. Right, right. And that's great news for all of you. C goes too far because it says they're always, what did it say? They're always expressed metaphorically. No. Again, that goes too far. The passage says often. Often and always are very, very clearly not the same thing. And because of that, we get to rule C out because of that automatically. That's a relief when we can rule an answer out, because that gets us one step closer to our final answer. And so, again, the instructions above said just select one unless otherwise instructed. But the specific instructions for question 1 said pick all that apply. Okay, we're able to rule out C because it went too far. Otherwise, the statement was okay. I mean, if it had simply not had the word always, then it would have been correct because the passage said often. But because it said always, that went too far. And so that made it invalid. Okay, and in A, we have what I call a partial word. Some record is available. It may be very slight. It may be very small. It didn't say we have a complete record. We have some evidence of their way of thinking. Yeah, that's true. We don't have to, I mean, it could be 1% of the total oeuvre. It could be 99%. That doesn't matter. All of that's included in the word some. And so that's fine. We're going to accept A. Now we're going to look at B. And here again is careful, cautious language for at least some expressions. And notice it's also sort of vague from another ancient language. It doesn't specify which language. It says from another language. And at least some. Notice that could leave open the possibility that every expression might be traceable back. But we know for certain at least some of them can be traced back. So yeah, again, because it used cautious or careful language, it's acceptable. And C, because it used this strong, absolute, rigid language, it was ruled out. That's why A and B are correct, and C is not, because it's overly strict. Okay, let me get these two words straight, not because I want to be a nudge, but because it's important to know the difference, specifically for reading comprehension questions. Okay, the word infer, that means we as the readers assume something or we conclude something. We infer. The passage can only imply. So the passage implies something, and then we infer it. We can't imply something from the passage. The passage can't infer anything. The passage implies, and we infer. And so B, which sentence? Just a second. Let me see what they say. It might be clear. In the first sentence of the second paragraph, and it says that the language could use abstract terms to express the nuances of their thought. They were able to. Okay, this implies that we know this to be a fact. We're not guessing it. Because, you know, scientists, using kind of careful language, would say, it is believed. But this goes much further than that. It says they were able to. That's a definitive statement. You don't make a statement like that unless it's based on evidence. Okay, wait a minute. So that explains A.